What if you were dying from thirst and hunger? Would you give your iman up, your faith up, in order to survive? Probably not. Probably not. Because you'd rather die in hunger and thirst than give up your religion, right? This is how much we value our faith. It's priceless. Brothers and sisters, let me introduce you to Norway. This is a European country where the vast majority of people have become irreligious. There are 200,000 Muslims of a population of about 5 million, and most of these 200,000 Muslims have no idea how to explain Islam to their non-Muslim friends and neighbors. But that needs to change. Allah sent His messenger to call people to eternal success. And that is why Muslims in Norway are now establishing a masjid and dawah center to enhance the Norwegian dawah. But they cannot do this alone. We need to support them. If you donate to this cause, you will inshallah reap the rewards of thousands of Muslims coming back to Islam, and many of those will become du'at and invite to Islam. You will share in the reward for all those shahadas and good deeds to come, inshallah. So click the link and donate now and share the video for extra reward. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you guys doing? There is one hadith, which is a very special hadith, which is very pertinent to the issues relating to gender. Now, especially in the modern age, after the Enlightenment period, after Renaissance, after all these times, and different kind of ideologies have emerged. The question is, to what extent have those ideologies, especially in the West, had an impact on human society? Now, it's a very important question, both for religious audiences and non-religious audiences. I came across this hadith in Bukhari, and actually there are lots of hadith which corroborate this hadith. It's called turuq, different pathways of hadith, talking about a very interesting incident. And I regard this hadith, from my very limited knowledge of hadith, as probably the most telling hadith of gender relations in Islam, or in the 7th century period. Now, why is this important for religious people or non-religious people, Muslim audiences and non-Muslim audiences alike? Because one question that has kind of plagued our imagination has been, to what extent have ideologies the like of, say, feminism, second, third wave feminism, any type of feminism, had an impact on human behavior? To what extent has it actually shaped what men or women do? To what extent has it shaped societies and gender relations? And I think this hadith is very important in answering that question. Now, I'm not going to be giving you an exact word-for-word narration of this hadith, but I'm going to be spelling it out for you in kind of paraphrased terms, and give you a link in the description box of the entire hadith. Although I may say as well that this hadith has different narrations, but this one isn't Bukhari. Ibn Abbas, who was the turjaman of the Qur'an, the prolific Sahabi that wanted to know every little thing about the Qur'an, he went to Umar ibn al-Khattab, who, as many of you will know, is the second caliph after the death of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and after Abu Bakr, and also one of the best friends of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He went to him because he wanted to know the meaning of an ayah of the Qur'an in chapter number 66, where it said, "In tatuba ila Allah faqad saghat qulubukuma." If you both repent to Allah, then Allah has made it so that you may do so. And this was a verse in chapter 66 that Ibn Abbas wanted to know who these two were referring to. So he went to Umar al-Khattab, and then Umar ibn al-Khattab narrated the story to him. So the hadith is narrated by Ibn Abbas. And Umar ibn al-Khattab started by saying something very interesting. He says, "Kunna ma'shara Quraysh, qawmun naghlibu nisa'ana." He said that we, the people of Quraysh, were a people who used to dominate our wives. فَلَمَّا قَدِمْنَا الْمَدِينَةَ, when we went to the Medina, the people, the Ansar, they were a qawm يَغْلِبُهُمْ نِسَاؤُهُمْ, were a people that their wives used to dominate them. Now, I found this very interesting, very surprising. I have to be honest, the first time I came across this hadith, it made me think. This is Umar ibn al-Khattab. This is a 7th century audience. This is at least 1,300 and something odd years before feminism could even be referred to as such. And there is this phraseology, very gendered phraseology being used, that we were a people that we used to dominate our wives, and these people of Al-Ansar, who are another group of people, were a group of people, he's saying their wives dominated them. And he said, he narrates the story of going to his wife. Umar al-Khattab is saying, I went to my wife, and he was speaking to her about the attitudes of Medinan society. And she answered back to Umar ibn al-Khattab. Now Umar ibn al-Khattab, for those who know, he was a very strong character, very assertive character, very extroverted character, extremely confident person. He was a feared man, actually. A feared man, a big man, physically big, and a big personality. And remember, he was just saying that, we were the people that used to dominate our wives. And his wife now is answering him back. So he said, أَتُرَاجِعِينَنِي? Are you answering me back? And his wife, Umar ibn Khattab's wife, returned and she said, actually, the Prophet's wife, even the Prophet's wives, who are meant to be like, she didn't say this, but who are in Islam, meant to be the epitome of, they كُنَّا يَهْجُرْنَا النَّبِيَّ مِنَ النَّهَارِ إِلَى اللَّيْلِ. They used to leave off the Prophet, withdraw from the Prophet Muhammad from the night, from the day into the night, meaning they used to give him the cold shoulder. They used to withdraw from him. And he was completely befuddled and bewildered and bedazzled and shocked by this comment. So he got triggered. You want to put it in that? He got triggered by that. Because remember, Umar ibn al-Khattab's daughter Hafsa was the wife of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu, one of the wives of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he says, when he heard that, it's like everything switched off. He put on his clothes. فَجَمَعْتُ ثِيَابِي عَلَيْهِ. I got my clothes and I put it on me. And he went to Hafsa, his daughter. And he said to his daughter, he said to her, is it true that one of you, i.e. one of the wives of the Prophet, used to leave the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam min al-nahar ila al-layl, from the day into the night, not from the night into the day, but from the day into the night, meaning it's not talking about marital relations or anything like that, because that would be a different level of transgression, which we have no evidence ever happened, by the way. But anyway, is it the case that you used to do something like that? She said, yes, naam. She said, yes. He said, whoever does anything like that, قَدْ خَابَتْ وَقَدْ خَسِرَتْ. She's lost, she's a failure. And then he was triggered already. So imagine he's talking to his own daughter. And by the way, this shows us, it gives us a glimpse. I don't want to make too much commentary at this point because I'll comment on this afterwards. Of how the father-in-law deals with the son-in-law. A pious son-in-law, but this one, the most pious son-in-law. He got triggered on behalf of the son-in-law. In this case, it's the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who he loved the most. Who he loved the most. He said, do you think, don't ever do that. He said, whoever who's done that is a failure. And what about your friend? He's talking about Aisha, who was known, another wife of the Prophet, that she's أَوْضَأْ مِنْكِ وَأَحَبْ إِلَى النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم. She's more beautiful than you anyway, and she's more beloved to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he saw that she was being jari'ah, she was being bold, so he was bold with her. She was triggering him, he triggered her. And this is in many ways the right way to advise a woman who is disrespecting her husband with all due respect. Now we see a lot of people, they see that the woman is complaining and withdrawing from the husband, not giving him his rights, and they egg her on. They push her to do some more. Yeah, do it more. This is the father of he loves her so much. Yeah. As the Qur'an says, وَإِذَا قُلْتُمْ فَعْدِلُوا وَإِنْ كَانَ ذَا قُرْبَى. If you speak, then speak the truth, and even if it is someone close to you. So this was the manhaj and the way of Umar ibn al-Khattab. So he went after that to see the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself. And he had a man guarding the door. His name was Rabah. He was guarding the door and he was by himself. Because his wives had told him that the Hafsa had told him that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had been like secluded and by himself. And this was going to give us another lesson, by the way, which is a very important lesson which we don't hear enough of. I'll tell you what happened. At first, he didn't allow anybody in, including Umar. But eventually, he let Umar come into the house. So Umar came into the house, and the first question he asked him, "Did you divorce your wives?" And he said no. He didn't divorce his wives. So he said, "Allahu Akbar." Umar was celebrating because in reality, he doesn't want to see his daughter or any of the other mothers of the believers be divorced to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he was elated by the fact that there was no divorce that took place. And then Umar ibn al-Khattab, he said the same kind of thing that he was saying to Ibn Abbas in the beginning of the narration. And I want you to pay attention to the psychological cues here. They're very important because they relate to the gender discussions that are happening now, not just from feminists, but from these red pill and all these kind of things. Wallahi, it is an eye-opener to the manhaj of the Prophet of how he dealt with these issues before the existence of these ideologies. So Umar al-Khattab stated the same thing as he stated before. He said, "Nahnu ma'ashara Quraysh, qawmun naghlibu nisa'ana." We the people of Quraysh, were a people that we used to dominate our wives. And the people of Al-Ansar, their wives used to dominate them. So he's saying the same thing. The Prophet's reaction to this, he just smiled. Literally, abtasam. He just smiled. The hadith says he just smiled. So he didn't really engage with that. He didn't say, yes, no, to be honest, that was not the response of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then Umar al-Khattab, he stated that he went to his daughter and he told her what he told her. That Aisha is more beloved and all that kind of things that I told you before. And again, it said that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he merely smiled. He did not engage with Umar. And then Umar al-Khattab, he made dua, a supplication to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because he was sleeping on this kind of straw. And he said, the people of, the emperor of Rome and the emperor of Persia, they have all this wide expanse and you're sleeping on the floor. He goes, I make dua that Allah has 𝙗𝙤𝙤𝙤 on you. He would expand your abode, like he make you. The Prophet at that stage, he actually responded. He said, I'm not interested. Why should I? It's 𝙗𝙤 dunya. This is, it's not the thing I want. Because the hereafter and the eschaton and all that kind of thing. Now, long story short, ayat of the Qur'an actually came down for this. Now, why was the Prophet secluding from all the wives? Because they were actually asking him to give him money that he didn't have. That's why in Surah Al-Ahzab, يا نساء النبي إن كنتن تردن الحياة الدنيا وزينتها فتعالين. The ayah came down which said that if you want the adornments of this world, then come and I will set you free, and so on. So there was actually a choice given to the wives of the Prophet. If you didn't want to be with me, then you can go. And it would actually be effective and an effectual divorce. They had the choice. Many things can be extrapolated from this hadith. Number one, the Prophet didn't really engage with the dominating kind of discourse that Umar ibn al-Khattab came with. Because actually in other places, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has been described in a hadith, كَانَ سَهْلًا. He was actually very easygoing. And if anything, some shurrah of the hadith say that he was more easygoing than the people of Quraysh. Like people like Umar ibn al-Khattab. Some say that he didn't fit into that category of people that used to try and dominate his wife and so on. He was very easygoing. Which, by the way, flies in the face of some of the discourses that we're seeing in these manosphere spaces, where they think that the way to control your woman and so on is to basically be obnoxious and overly extroverted and so on. There's a time and a place for everything, and really there's almost no time and a place for that. And the Prophet ﷺ, that was not his manhaj. However, he didn't do nothing. He wasn't just taking abuse. He wasn't just, accepting. And I'm not saying that they were even abusing him, quite frankly, but he wasn't accepting these complaints and demands from his wives. How did he manage the behavior of his wives? Really, you can call this anxiety accruement method. And really, in Islam, this is referred to as al-ila. And al-ila is something, الَّذِينَ يَأْلُونَ مِن نِسَائِهِمْ تَرَبَّصُوا أَرْبَعَةِ أَشْهُرٍ. It's in the Qur'an, ila. What is ila? When you say, you take an oath that I'm not going to see my wife for X amount of time, and you have up to 4 months. And this is the way that you create a healthy balance in the relationship. Because when that anxiety starts to accrue, and it will accrue on both sides. I mean, if a man is doing this, anxiety will accrue for him as much as it will accrue for her. And that in that situation is a useful moment of reflection. It's a useful, and it's more useful than being in a toxic situation in the household where you're both shouting at each other and there could be potential for clash and destruction and fighting and so on. So this was the way in which, through which and by which the Prophet ﷺ decided to deal with serial complaining of 9 women, which were his wives. And they did complain. And he didn't just sit there and take the complaints. There's a limit to complaints. Yes, there's a limit to complaints in Islam. But then there's something we must, as men, acknowledge as well. Number one, it was very clear that the behavior of the Qurashi woman, the Ansari woman, were affected by the Qurashi woman. The opposite. Yeah. So in other words, the fact that some women can become emboldened by other women is not something which is because of the feminist movement. This was happening centuries before feminism even existed. Number two, you could even say that there are some trends, some cross-cultural continuities in female collective temperament that existed in such a place as 7th century Arabia, which is not explicable by ideological reductionism. And therefore it's important for us to realize that not everything is because of feminism. That a woman can be behaving in a certain way simply because of psychological temperament. Not because she's influenced by the feminist movement or feminist ideology. It's not always the reason. So we have to be more nuanced. Because if it's the case that even the highest of women can be influenced by one another in the negative, and that brings them to act in a behaviorally unacceptable way, then min bab awla, or from logical reasoning and analogy, women that are not the wives, prophets, are going to act in a very similar way. And that's why the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said, لا تستقيم المرأة على طريق واحد. That in the hadith, that a woman is not going to be with you on one way. Yani she's not going to give you one mood. You'll find that there is a tempestuous and tumultuous way through which and by which some women interact with their husbands. And that is something we have to accept, because accepting this means that our expectations will be realistic. You don't get married and think, oh, she has to be completely submit. There's no such thing as a totally infallible woman that's going to do everything you want at every time you want. However, having said that, the Prophet didn't just take, this behavior lying down. There was a reaction. And what kind of reaction was it? Was it shouting and swearing and pushing and... No. It was a reaction whereby it removed himself from the situation. He done this thing called al-ila, which is sanctioned in the Qur'an, which is the right of a man and not the right of a woman, because the man is the qawwam of the woman, which means that he has a certain authority that the woman does not have. الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض وبما أنفقوا من أموالهم. Chapter 4 verse 34, that man is the maintainer and protector of the woman. And so also it's mentioned in the Quran that وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةً, that men have a degree of managerial capability of a woman. So clearly there are some things that are put in place for the man to be able to control an otherwise tumultuous situation. And the Prophet opted for that which would force a person into a state of reflection, force a person to be grateful, force a person to be respectful. And then when he did come back, 29 days later, to his wives, the situation was amended. So this is the way to deal with the situation. And so we take inspiration from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam on how to manage and mitigate the situation of gender relations with our wives. And sorry to say, so too should the women of today, Muslim women of today, look at the Sahabiyat For a realistic guide, yes, they made their mistakes, but they come back from them. That's why in the Qur'an it stated, فَإِن تَتُوبَ إِلَى اللَّهِ فَقَدْ سَغَتْ قُلُوبُكُمَا, that Allah had made it easy for you to do tawbah, and of course they did make tawbah, which means they come back and they recognize their faults, and then cohesion can happen and stability of families can happen. But so much can be seen in this hadith by way of gender relations. In conclusion, not everything is related to feminism. Sometimes it's to do with the female collective temperament. And we also, as men, need to have the right expectations. Women need to also have the right expectations. And that will be that. And I thought it would be very interesting to look at that in juxtaposition with some of the work that we've already done on ideology. And hopefully that was beneficial. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. What if you are dying from thirst and hunger? Would you give your iman up, your faith up, in order to survive? Probably not. Probably not. Because you'd rather die in hunger and thirst than give up your religion, right? This is how much we value our faith. It's priceless. Brothers and sisters, let me introduce you to Norway. This is a European country where the vast majority of people have become irreligious. There are 200,000 Muslims of a population of about 5 million, and most of these 200,000 Muslims have no idea how to explain Islam to their non-Muslim friends and neighbors. But that needs to change. Allah sent His messenger to call people to eternal success. And that is why Muslims in Norway are now establishing a masjid and dawah center to enhance the Norwegian dawah. But they cannot do this alone. We need to support them. If you donate to this cause, you will inshallah reap the rewards of thousands of Muslims coming back to Islam, and many of those will become du'at and invite to Islam. You will share in the reward for all those shahadas and good deeds to come, inshallah. So click the link and donate now and share the video for extra reward.